There is a strange moment in a person's life when the noise begins to disappear, the messages become fewer, the invitations stop coming. The conversations that once seemed necessary begin to feel repetitive. You start noticing how often people speak without saying anything, how frequently friendships are built on convenience, shared boredom, mutual insecurity, or the fear of being alone. And then something changes inside you. You stop chasing people. You stop explaining yourself. You stop forcing connections that have already died. The first transformation that takes place when you spend enough time alone is subtle, but it changes the entire structure of your personality. You stop needing validation from others. This does not happen overnight. In the beginning, you may still look for approval in small ways. You may wonder whether people understand your choices, whether they respect your silence, whether they approve of your ambitions, whether they notice your absence. Even when you claim not to care, part of your mind may still be waiting for someone to confirm that you are doing the right thing. But solitude gradually exposes this dependence. When there is no audience, no constant praise, no group waiting to approve of your behavior, you are forced to confront a difficult question. Who are you when nobody is watching? Most people build their identities through reflection. They look at the reactions of others and use those reactions to decide how they should feel about themselves. If people admire them, they feel valuable. If people ignore them, they feel invisible. If people praise their appearance, their intelligence, their success, or their personality, they experience a temporary rise in confidence. But if the praise disappears, so does the confidence. Their self-worth is not truly inside them. It is being rented from the opinions of other people. The rare personality eventually becomes tired of this arrangement. They begin to notice how exhausting it is to constantly perform. Every decision becomes connected to an invisible audience. What will people think? Will they approve? Will they criticize? Will they laugh? Will they become jealous? Will they still accept me if I change? These questions silently control the lives of millions of people. They choose careers because their families approve of them. They stay in relationships because leaving would create judgment. They hide their ambitions because their friends might mock them. They pretend to enjoy things they secretly dislike because they fear becoming the outsider. But when you spend enough time alone, the audience begins to disappear. And without the audience, the performance becomes impossible to maintain. You start making decisions based on what you actually want, rather than what will create the best reaction. You may choose a path that nobody understands. You may become interested in subjects that your friends find boring. You may stop explaining why you are changing. You may begin working on goals that require years of silence before anyone notices the result. At first, this can feel uncomfortable because you are no longer receiving the emotional reward that comes from being seen. But slowly, something stronger develops. You begin to experience the satisfaction of doing something simply because it is meaningful to you. You exercise without posting it. You study without announcing it. You build without telling everyone what you are building. You improve without demanding recognition. And this creates a different kind of confidence. It is quieter because it does not need to be constantly displayed. You no longer need to tell people that you are disciplined. Your discipline exists whether they know about it or not. You no longer need to convince people that you are intelligent. You continue learning even when nobody compliments you. You no longer need to prove that you are strong. You survive difficult moments without turning them into a public performance. This is where validation begins to lose its power over you. You can still appreciate praise, but you no longer depend on it. You can still enjoy recognition, but you no longer require it. You can still listen to criticism, but you no longer automatically surrender your identity to it. The opinions of others become information rather than commands. That distinction is everything. When someone criticizes you, you can examine the criticism without immediately becoming defensive. Perhaps there is something useful in it. Perhaps there is nothing useful at all. Either way, the other person's opinion does not instantly become your reality. You have developed an internal standard against which you measure yourself. This is one of the most difficult forms of independence because society constantly trains people to seek approval. From childhood, rewards are given for obedience. Praise is offered for conformity. Acceptance is often conditional. You learn very early that certain behaviors make people smile while others create rejection. Over time, you begin adjusting yourself automatically. You become skilled at becoming the person others want to see. The rare personality eventually asks whether this adaptation has gone too far. They begin removing the layers, the need to impress, the need to explain, the need to be understood by everyone, the need to prove that they are worthy. And as these needs disappear, something unexpected happens. Their relationships become more honest. They no longer approach people from desperation. They do not enter conversations secretly begging to be accepted. They do not offer exaggerated versions of themselves in exchange for approval. They can be warm without being needy. They can be confident without dominating every room. They can walk away from rejection without treating it as a judgment on their entire existence. This is why the person who no longer depends on validation becomes difficult to manipulate. Praise no longer controls them. Insults no longer control them. Attention no longer controls them. Rejection no longer controls them. They become less predictable because their behavior is no longer determined by the emotional reactions of the crowd. And when a person stops needing everyone to approve of them, they finally become capable of making decisions that are truly their own. When you stop needing constant validation from others, your standards begin to change. You no longer allow everyone to enter your life simply because they show interest. You become highly selective about who gets access to you. This does not mean you become arrogant, cold, or incapable of connection. It means you finally understand that access to your time, attention, emotions, and private world should not be given away without thought. Most people treat access as something unlimited. They answer every message, accept every invitation, explain every decision, and allow almost anyone to know their weaknesses, their plans, and their personal struggles. They believe being open with everyone makes them genuine. But openness without discernment is not always authenticity. Sometimes it is simply a lack of boundaries. The rare personality begins to understand that every person who enters your life leaves something behind. They influence your thoughts, your emotions, your habits, your standards, and even your perception of what is possible. This is why choosing who gets close to you is not a minor social decision. You are not merely choosing who to spend time with. You are choosing which voices will have access to your mind. Some people make you feel smaller every time you speak to them. They disguise criticism as humor. They make your ambitions sound unrealistic. They constantly remind you of your past mistakes. They encourage you to remain familiar because your growth makes them uncomfortable. Other people only appear when they need something. They are absent when you are struggling, but suddenly become available when you have something to offer. Then there are those who are fascinated by your weaknesses, but strangely quiet when you succeed. They want access to your vulnerability, but feel threatened by your strength. At one point, you may have tolerated all of this because you were afraid of being alone. You believed that having someone was better than having no one. You accepted relationships that drained you because the thought of losing them seemed worse than the pain they caused. But solitude changes your calculations. Once you discover that being alone is not as terrifying as you imagined, you stop accepting every connection simply to avoid emptiness. Your standards become quieter but stronger. You begin observing before trusting. You notice how people treat those who cannot benefit them. You notice how they react when you say no. You notice whether they respect your boundaries or try to negotiate them. You notice whether their kindness disappears when they are not receiving attention. You notice whether they celebrate your progress or become strangely distant when you begin to outgrow them. You stop being impressed by words alone. Anyone can promise loyalty. Anyone can say they care. Anyone can call themselves your friend. But time reveals patterns, and patterns reveal character. The highly selective person understands this. They do not rush to label everyone as a friend. They may be friendly with many people, but genuine access is reserved for very few. There is a difference between being polite and being intimate. There is a difference between speaking with someone and trusting them. There is a difference between enjoying someone's company and allowing them to influence the direction of your life. This distinction protects you from one of the most common mistakes people make: confusing familiarity with loyalty. Just because someone has known you for years does not mean they understand you. Just because someone has shared your past does not mean they deserve unlimited access to your future. Sometimes the people who have known you the longest are the people most invested in keeping you exactly as you were. They remember every version of you that was weaker, more insecure, and easier to influence. When you begin changing, they may interpret your growth as betrayal. But growth often requires distance from the environments that made your old identity comfortable. This is why the rare personality becomes protective of their inner circle. They understand that trust should not be given because someone demands it. It should be earned through consistency. They understand that emotional closeness should not be based on intensity alone. Someone can make you feel deeply connected while still being completely unreliable. The strongest relationships are not always the loudest or most dramatic. Often, they are built quietly through repeated evidence. A person who is highly selective does not need a large circle to feel important. They would rather have a few relationships that bring clarity than many relationships that create confusion. They would rather be alone than surrounded by people who constantly require them to defend their boundaries. They would rather be misunderstood by strangers than deeply understood by people who secretly wish to control them. And once you begin treating your attention as something valuable, you stop giving it to anyone who simply asks for it, especially when they have shown you through their behavior that they do not know how to handle the privilege of being close to you. The third transformation begins when you stop trusting words more than evidence. You learn to trust patterns more than promises. This is one of the most important lessons a person can develop because words are cheap, emotional, and easily used to create an impression. Anyone can promise loyalty in a moment of excitement. Anyone can say they care when they are afraid of losing access to you. Anyone can apologize when the consequences of their actions become uncomfortable. But words spoken in a single moment reveal very little. Patterns reveal far more. The rare personality eventually stops asking, "What did this person say?" and begins asking, "What does this person consistently do?" This shift changes the way you see people. Someone may tell you they respect you, but do they respect your boundaries when you say no? Someone may say they support your ambitions, but how do they react when your success begins to separate you from them? Someone may promise they will always be there, but what happens when you are no longer entertaining, useful, or convenient? Someone may apologize beautifully, but do they repeat the same behavior a week later? These questions reveal the difference between performance and character. Most people are easily influenced by emotional moments. A powerful apology can make them forget years of disrespect. A dramatic promise can make them ignore a long history of broken commitments. A few affectionate words can make them overlook repeated betrayal. They become attached to what someone says they will become instead of observing who that person has consistently been. But the rare personality becomes more patient. They no longer rush to judge someone based on one impressive conversation or one emotional display. They watch. They allow time to reveal what excitement hides. They observe how people behave when they are angry, disappointed, jealous, bored, or powerless. These moments often expose more than kindness ever could. Almost anyone can appear generous when they are receiving admiration. Almost anyone can act loyal when the relationship benefits them. The real test begins when their interests conflict with yours. This is why patterns are so powerful. One mistake may be an accident. A repeated mistake becomes a choice. One moment of selfishness may be human weakness. A consistent pattern of selfishness reveals character. One broken promise may be understandable. A lifetime of broken promises is information. The rare personality does not need to become paranoid. They simply stop ignoring evidence. This is a crucial distinction. Distrust is not always wisdom. Sometimes people become so afraid of betrayal that they refuse to believe anyone. They see hidden motives everywhere. They interpret every mistake as proof of evil. That is not discernment. That is fear wearing the mask of intelligence. True discernment is calmer. It does not rush. It does not need to accuse. It simply observes. You can listen to what someone says while watching what they do. You can accept an apology while still remembering the pattern that made the apology necessary. You can forgive someone without giving them the same level of access they previously abused. You can care about a person while recognizing that they are not capable of giving you the relationship you want. This is where emotional maturity begins. You stop trying to force people to become different. You stop arguing with reality. You stop explaining the same boundary to someone who has already shown you that they understand it and simply do not respect it. Many people waste years trying to convince others to treat them better. They deliver speeches, they make threats, they issue final warnings. They explain their pain in greater detail, hoping that the right words will awaken empathy in someone who has repeatedly demonstrated a lack of it. But the rare personality eventually realizes that information is not always the problem. Sometimes the other person already knows. They know what hurts you. They know what you have asked them to stop doing. They know how their behavior affects you. And they continue anyway. At that point, the question is no longer whether they understand. The question is what you are willing to tolerate. Postballs answer questions that promises cannot. A person who consistently respects your time is showing you something. A person who consistently disappears when you need them is showing you something. A person who consistently celebrates your victories is showing you something. A person who consistently becomes hostile when you grow is showing you something. A person who repeatedly crosses your boundaries and then blames you for having them is showing you something. You do not need to create a dramatic confrontation every time someone reveals themselves. Sometimes the most intelligent response is simply to update your understanding of them. You become less surprised, less emotionally shaken, less disappointed. Because disappointment often comes from expecting a person to behave differently from the pattern they have already shown you. Once you trust patterns more than promises, you stop being shocked by predictable behavior. You stop being hypnotized by temporary kindness. You stop allowing one beautiful moment to erase a history of ugly ones. You stop allowing one mistake to erase a history of genuine loyalty. You become more accurate. And accuracy is one of the greatest forms of protection a person can develop. Because when you see people clearly, you no longer need to hate them for being who they are. You simply stop expecting from them what they have repeatedly proven they cannot give, and you stop confusing what you hope they will become with what their behavior has already revealed them to be. The fourth transformation begins when you discover your true identity in solitude. Most people believe they know who they are, but much of what they call personality is actually adaptation. They know how to behave around friends, family, coworkers, and strangers. They know how to make people laugh, how to appear confident, how to avoid criticism, and how to become acceptable to whatever environment they are in. But remove the audience, remove the expectations, remove the constant noise, and a more difficult question appears: who are you when nobody is watching? This is where solitude becomes uncomfortable. When you are constantly surrounded by people, you can avoid yourself. There is always a conversation to join, a message to answer, an argument to have, or someone else's problems to solve. Noise protects you from reflection. It keeps you moving so quickly that you never have to examine the direction in which you are going. But when the noise disappears, your own thoughts become impossible to escape. You begin noticing the things you have been avoiding, the ambitions you abandoned, the fears you disguised as logic, the relationships you maintained out of habit, the weaknesses you blamed on other people, the dreams you secretly wanted but were too afraid to pursue. Solitude removes the distractions that allow you to keep pretending. This is why many people fear being alone. They are not necessarily afraid of the absence of people. They are afraid of what they might discover when there is no one left to distract them from themselves. The rare personality eventually learns to remain in that silence. At first, it may feel empty. You may reach for your phone simply because you are uncomfortable with your own mind. You may feel the urge to contact someone, not because you genuinely want to speak with them, but because silence has become unbearable. But if you remain long enough, something begins to change. The mind becomes clearer. You start separating your own desires from the desires that were placed inside you by others. You begin asking whether you truly want the life you are pursuing or whether you simply want the approval that comes with it. You question whether your ambitions belong to you or whether they were inherited from your family, your culture, your friends, or the expectations of society. You begin noticing how often you have performed a version of yourself to remain accepted. Perhaps you acted more confident than you felt. Perhaps you pretended to enjoy things because the people around you enjoyed them. Perhaps you hid your intelligence because you feared appearing different. Perhaps you abandoned your ambition because the people closest to you were uncomfortable with your growth. Solitude gives you permission to examine all of this. And slowly, you begin removing the layers. You stop asking, who do people want me to be? You begin asking, who am I when I am not trying to be accepted? This question can be frightening because the answer may force you to change your life. You may realize that certain friendships are built around a version of yourself that no longer exists. You may realize that your social identity depends on habits you no longer enjoy. You may realize that some people only recognize the old you and become uncomfortable when you begin becoming someone new. This is why personal growth often creates distance. When you change internally, the relationships built around your former identity may begin to feel unnatural. Conversations that once seemed exciting become repetitive. Environments that once felt comfortable begin to feel restrictive. You are not necessarily better than the people you are leaving behind, but you are no longer the same person who entered those relationships. And many people experience this change as loneliness. But loneliness can sometimes be the space between identities. The old version of you is disappearing, but the new version has not fully formed yet. During this period, you may feel disconnected from everyone. You may not recognize yourself in your old environment, yet you may not know where you belong next. This is the stage where many people return to their former habits simply because familiarity feels safer than transformation. The rare personality stays with the discomfort. They understand that identity must sometimes be rebuilt in private. Before the world sees the new version of you, you must become that person when nobody is watching. You must develop discipline without applause. You must maintain your standards without witnesses. You must continue working when nobody knows what you are building. You must learn to respect yourself before demanding that others respect you. This is where a deeper form of confidence develops. You no longer need to constantly announce who you are because you know what you have survived, you know what you have built, you know what you have overcome. Your identity is no longer based entirely on the opinions of other people because you have spent enough time alone to discover evidence of your own strength. You begin trusting yourself, and self-trust is one of the rarest forms of power. When you trust yourself, you no longer need everyone else to confirm your decisions. You can listen to advice without becoming dependent on it. You can accept criticism without allowing it to destroy your sense of direction. You can change your mind without feeling that you have betrayed your identity. You become flexible without becoming easily controlled. You become independent without becoming isolated from reality. And the more comfortable you become with yourself, the less desperate you become to be understood by everyone. You realize that some people will misunderstand you no matter how carefully you explain yourself. You realize that some people only understand the version of you that benefits them. You realize that not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every opinion deserves a response. Not every person deserves access to the deepest parts of your mind. And as you become more comfortable with your own identity, the need to prove yourself slowly begins to disappear, leaving you with a quieter, more private understanding of who you are and what you are willing to become. The fifth transformation begins when you start protecting your peace more than your popularity. For most of your life, you are trained to believe that being liked is one of the highest forms of success. You learn to avoid disappointing people. You become careful with your words. You tolerate behavior that makes you uncomfortable because you fear being called difficult. You accept invitations you do not want to attend. You answer messages when you are exhausted. You continue conversations that drain you. You say yes when every part of you wants to say no. Slowly, without realizing it, you begin trading your peace for approval. The rare personality eventually becomes tired of this exchange. They begin to understand that popularity is often expensive. The more people who have access to you, the more opinions you must manage. The more people who expect your attention, the less time you have for your own thoughts. The more you depend on being liked, the more carefully you must behave to avoid rejection. You become a prisoner of the image you have created. This is why protecting your peace requires courage. You must be willing to disappoint people. You must be willing to be misunderstood. You must be willing to let someone believe that you have changed. Because you have changed. You no longer want to be liked at the cost of your stability. You no longer want to maintain relationships that require constant emotional exhaustion. You no longer want to explain why you need distance from people who repeatedly disturb your mind. Peace is not simply the absence of conflict. It is the ability to remain connected to yourself without constantly being pulled into the emotional chaos of others. Some people bring chaos wherever they go. They create unnecessary arguments, exaggerate small problems, demand constant reassurance, and turn every boundary into a personal attack. When you are younger, you may mistake their intensity for passion. You may believe that because the relationship creates powerful emotions, it must be meaningful. But with time, you begin to recognize the difference between intensity and depth. A relationship can be intense and still be destructive. A friendship can be exciting and still be exhausting. A person can make you feel alive while slowly destroying your ability to feel peaceful. The rare personality begins to ask a different question. Not, how much do I enjoy this person? But, how do I feel after spending time with them? Do you feel clearer or more confused? Stronger or weaker? Inspired or drained? Peaceful or emotionally unstable? These questions reveal the true effect of a relationship. Some people leave you feeling like you must defend yourself constantly. You replay conversations in your head. You wonder whether you said something wrong. You analyze their tone. You try to predict their moods. You become emotionally trapped in a constant cycle of uncertainty. And eventually, you realize that peace is worth more than popularity. You stop trying to keep everyone happy because you finally understand that it is impossible. No matter how carefully you behave, someone will criticize you. No matter how generous you are, someone will call you selfish. No matter how loyal you remain, someone will still decide that you are not enough. Once you accept this, you become free. You stop making decisions based entirely on how they will be received. You begin making decisions based on what allows you to remain aligned with yourself. This may mean leaving conversations without explaining every detail. It may mean refusing invitations. It may mean creating distance from people who have never respected your boundaries. It may mean becoming quieter in environments where you once felt obligated to perform. At first, people may react negatively. They may ask why you are distant. They may accuse you of thinking you are better than them. They may say you have changed. And perhaps the truth is that you have. The old version of you may have been easier to access because the old version of you was more willing to abandon your own peace to keep others comfortable. But peace requires boundaries. A boundary is not an attack. Silence is not always punishment. Distant is not always hatred. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for yourself is to stop participating in situations that repeatedly damage your emotional stability. You do not need to hate someone to stop giving them access. You do not need revenge to create distance. You do not need to prove that you are right. You simply need to recognize what consistently destroys your peace and stop inviting it into your life. The more you protect your peace, the more valuable your attention becomes. You become less reactive. You no longer allow every insult to control your mood. You no longer allow every argument to pull you into emotional warfare. You no longer feel obligated to respond to every accusation. You understand that some people provoke reactions because your reaction gives them power. When you refuse to participate, the entire dynamic changes. You become difficult to disturb because you no longer offer unlimited access to your emotions. This does not mean you become emotionless. It means you become responsible for what you allow to occupy your mind. You begin treating your inner world like a private territory. Not everyone is allowed to enter. Not every opinion is allowed to remain. Not every conflict deserves your energy. And once you understand the value of your peace, you become willing to lose popularity in exchange for protecting it, allowing the crowd to misunderstand you while you quietly preserve the part of yourself that no longer wants to be owned by anyone else's expectations. The sixth transformation is the point where independence reaches its most mature form. You become independent without becoming emotionally empty. This distinction is important because many people misunderstand what it means to be strong. They believe strength means needing nobody, trusting nobody, and allowing no one close enough to affect them. They turn emotional distance into an identity. They call themselves self-sufficient, but beneath the surface, they may simply be protecting old wounds. They reject connection before connection has the chance to disappoint them. True independence is different. The truly independent person does not say, "I need no one because everyone is worthless." They say, "I can survive without anyone. And because of that, I can choose relationships based on truth rather than desperation." This is a completely different position. When you are afraid of being alone, you may accept almost anything to keep someone in your life. You overlook disrespect. You excuse betrayal. You tolerate inconsistency. You remain attached to people who repeatedly show you that they do not value you. Your fear of losing them becomes stronger than your desire to protect yourself. But once you learn that you can stand alone, your relationships change. You no longer approach people from hunger. You approach them from choice. You do not need someone to rescue you from your own thoughts. You do not need someone to constantly reassure you that you are worthy. You do not need another person to give your life meaning. This allows you to connect with people without placing the entire weight of your emotional existence on their shoulders. You can love someone without making them responsible for your happiness. You can care deeply without becoming dependent. You can be vulnerable without surrendering your identity. This is one of the rarest forms of emotional strength because vulnerability is often confused with weakness. But there is nothing weak about allowing someone to see you honestly when you have the strength to leave if they misuse what you reveal. The dependent person hides their weaknesses because they fear rejection. The emotionally empty person hides their weaknesses because they refuse to trust anyone. The independent person can reveal their weaknesses without allowing those weaknesses to become weapons against them. They understand that connection always involves risk. You cannot truly know someone without allowing them to see parts of you that could potentially be misunderstood. You cannot build trust while remaining completely hidden. You cannot experience intimacy while constantly standing behind a wall. But the independent person does not remove all walls. They build doors, and they decide who is allowed to enter. This is the difference between openness and access. You can be kind without telling everyone your deepest secrets. You can be generous without allowing people to exploit you. You can love someone without abandoning your own principles. You can forgive someone without restoring the same level of trust. You can miss someone and still know that they do not belong in your life. These contradictions are signs of maturity. The immature mind wants simple answers. This person is good. That person is bad. I love them, so I must stay. They hurt me, so I must hate them. But human relationships are rarely that simple. You can love someone and still leave them. You can appreciate what someone gave you while recognizing that they can no longer accompany you. You can remember the good moments without allowing nostalgia to erase the reasons you had to walk away. Independence gives you this ability. You are no longer forced to turn every ending into hatred just to survive it. You can let go without destroying the memory. You can move forward without pretending the past meant nothing. You can accept that some people were important for a certain period of your life without demanding that they remain there forever. This is why the person who can be alone often becomes capable of deeper relationships. They are not constantly calculating what they can receive. They are not desperately trying to prevent abandonment. They are not manipulating people into staying. They are not testing loyalty every day. They can simply be present. They can listen. They can give. They can receive. They can disagree without believing that every disagreement means the relationship is ending. They can create space without interpreting distance as rejection. They understand that a healthy relationship is not a prison where two people must constantly prove their loyalty through total access. Sometimes closeness requires space. Sometimes love requires trust. Sometimes strength means allowing someone to live their own life without trying to control every movement. The independent person understands that real connection does not require ownership. This is why they become rare. They are not searching for someone to complete them. They are searching for someone who can stand beside them without demanding that either person disappear. And if they find that person, they appreciate the connection more deeply because they know its value without being terrified of its loss. They are capable of saying, I want you in my life, without secretly meaning, I cannot survive without you. That distinction changes everything, because the strongest relationships are not built by two incomplete people desperately clinging to each other. They are built by two people who have learned to stand on their own and still choose to walk together. This is the final stage of solitude. You do not become a person who needs no one. You become a person who no longer accepts anyone simply because you are afraid of being alone. You stop chasing connection and start recognizing it. You stop begging people to stay and start observing whether they genuinely want to. You stop confusing emotional dependence with love. You stop believing that loneliness is worse than losing yourself. And when you finally understand that, solitude no longer feels like a punishment. It becomes the foundation from which you can choose people freely, love without desperation, leave without destruction, and remain completely yourself even when someone else is standing beside you.